Hello again. Hundreds of coal trucks have allegedly been queuing to offload at Richards Bay Port, and according to Transnet Port Authority, the port continues to receive some trucks. Let's get an update on the situation and find out exactly what is happening. We're joined by the Road Freight Association CEO, Gavin Kelly. Gavin, thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. So according to a report by the Times Live, they've seen a situation report from Transnet which states that as of 10:30 a.m. yesterday, 170 trucks were given entry to the port. These allegedly are coal trucks. Do you know about the situation?
We have a little bit of information trickling through. At one stage, there were about 330 odd trucks standing outside the terminal that couldn't get to it, so that was quite a long backlog along the end too. The exact reason we can't find out. A couple of months ago it was because there was a conveyor belt malfunction on one of the auto feeders for the ships, but that seems to have been resolved. So right now we are aware of the backlog, but we can't exactly find out why it's happened. I think just having a look at the screen next to me, they let in, and I think you said so, about 150 odd trucks have been allowed in since 10:30 or by 10:30. It seems to be flowing, but very, very slowly.
Do you know what's on those trucks?
Well, they're coal trucks. At this stage, they're side tippers, and one can reasonably safely presume that 90% of them will be coal. There might be a bit of fertilizer or manganese in there, but majority is coal.
That is going where? Do we know?
A lot of it is, it's going all around the world. You'll know that a number of European countries are not getting gas from Russia because of the Ukraine conflict. So there is some coal being exported into European countries. They've refired up some of their coal-fired power stations. And then a fair amount, of course, is going to China.
At such a rapid rate, we will speak to an energy expert because the conversation is for South Africa to move away from coal, yet we are exporting coal at such rapid rates. I mean, you speak of some 330 odd trucks. What is it that some of your members are telling you about the conditions that truck drivers are facing?
Well, one of the biggest problems is the delay. So truck drivers have got a very clearly defined maximum driving hour period, and once you start exceeding that, and the law is quite clear, the labour law is quite clear in terms of when the drivers seem to be on or off duty. And so now when you end up standing in queues for hours on end, that obviously brings in our concern of fatigue. The driver's going to get tired. You don't get proper rest in queues like that. You have to be awake and vigilant all the time and creeping forward. And obviously, you don't want to lose your spot in the queue, so there's huge amount of stress. So that's really our first concern is the health and safety of our drivers. And then it places huge delays. So what happens is that a number of new companies have arisen. I'm sure you've seen many, many reports that there's suddenly far more trucks on the road because the coal is just not being moved out of the mines fast enough. So our producers, our mines, are putting huge pressure on logistics companies to move the coal as fast as possible, to get it on the boards, the ships, to get it out, because that's when they get paid.
Now, could this be related to the many incidents that we see of accidents involving trucks? Because we're trying to rush and get the coal as fast as possible, as much as possible out of South Africa.
I think there's a definite correlation between that and the number of incidents that you see. When you start to push your logistics chains in an unforgiving, continuous motion, something has to give. So we've seen a number of aspects. Roads start to take the punch because they're not designed to take that sort of weight, that sort of mass, the continual movement of trucks, so they wear down. And this is before there's any sort of overloading. This is just the pure load moving. And then obviously your driving team. A company will only have a certain number of drivers, and as those drivers begin to become exhausted, they either go on to sick leave because they just cannot continue, they need to take these breaks, or you have issues, you could make mistakes, and unfortunately humans make mistakes. The more tired you get, the more sort of mistakes you're going to make, whether you make them intentionally or unintentionally. And if you start to lose your experienced drivers because they just cannot continue, or there aren't enough experienced drivers, you might find that suddenly there are far less experienced drivers on the road. And we all know that experience is the only real resolving factor, together with safe driving, that makes sure that incidents are kept to a minimum. So it's a mixture of a whole lot of pressures.
Yeah. Gavin, you mentioned that there is a rise of trucking companies that are being employed to take the coal and transport the coal out of South Africa as quickly as possible. They're employed by whom?
The trucking companies or the drivers?
The trucking companies.
Trucking companies. So obviously those who are exporting the coal, sorry, I didn't quite understand it. Those who are exporting coal are going to look for people to move. So, say you want to move from your house, wherever you are. Let's just say you're in Durban and you want to move to wherever, up the road, even to Pietermaritzburg. You're going to go and look for people to help you, and you get hold of one or two well-known companies, and I'm not going to mention company names, but you get hold of A and B and C and D transport company and say, could you move my house goods? And they say, sorry, we're all booked up over this period, and you go look for somebody else. Now, in the mining sphere, it's exactly the same. The existing number of operators, one can only presume, have all been fully booked up, because remember, there's been huge pressure on coal export. The demand for coal around the world is something incredible. We haven't seen this in many, many years. And the current fleet then just couldn't deal with it. So the pressure was there, and there were entrepreneurs. Just because you're an entrepreneur and you see an opportunity in the market doesn't mean that's a bad thing at all. Doesn't mean you're not going to operate honestly. And all of this coal needed to be moved, so therefore there are far more trucks on the road. The unfortunate thing is our rail doesn't seem to be able to deal with the demand, and that's a crisis.
Sure. To your point of European countries dealing with an energy crisis, I think it's in Germany. There was a report yesterday of a village, Lutzeritz, I think, where people who live there are fighting the government there because they want to mine coal, essentially. So that we're seeing some 330 odd trucks queuing up and waiting to export the coal. Outside of the conveyor belt that you mentioned has since been fixed, is this an unusual situation? Say it wasn't coal. Are these volumes unusual?
Well, they're unusual given the demand for energy or alternative energy sources. They're unusual in terms of that. We did lose some export volumes about 5 to 6 years ago, but we've picked those up again. But at the moment, it's called the commodities boom, and everybody is trying to hitch a ride on that bus or get a seat on that bus to sell. So it is unusual. And of course, the downside is when that boom disappears, is that going to be problematic for those who dealt solely in coal or moved coal even?
Currently, is it safe to say that it's problematic for South Africa? We are, after all, facing an energy crisis. If this is top-tier coal, because how do you then understand this with what we are being made to understand, that there is sabotage at Eskom, right? So also when sometimes it rains, we have load shedding because the coal is wet. But here we have what appears to be top-tier coal, and it's being shipped out of the country while we are sitting on whatever stage of load shedding we're at this hour.
Well, I don't think it's because we don't have enough coal. We might have coal supply chain challenges, and when I say that, that's a terribly important sounding phrase. What it means is that we might have, for example, our power stations were built on the coal fields many years ago, and those coal fields have been used up, so the distance to move coal to the power stations from where it's now being mined is far, far longer than what it was when those power stations were originally designed. And when they were designed, there were rail networks built for those and conveyor networks because it was relatively short distances. We're talking nothing more than about 50 kilometers away from the power stations. That's why they're in Mpumalanga. Now, we've seen that those coal reserves have been used up. The land has been reclaimed. It's back under agriculture, whatever the case may be. And the coal fields are further afield. That's why you would have seen that the Kusilis and the Medufis of the world were built traditionally away from where all the other power stations were, because they were built closer to the newer aspects of, or the newer fields of coal. So now it's really getting coal to those stations, and the only reliable, the only feasible way at the moment, whether we like it or not, is by road. Railway links haven't been built, and definitely not conveyor links. So that has placed a huge pressure on time and on being able to get the coal into the power station consistently. And those are the challenges we see. And then, of course, as I've said, and I've said it 2 or 3 times, and sorry if I repeat myself, this huge demand for coal overseas.
Also curious, Gavin Kelly is the CEO of the Road Freight Association. Thank you.